Hello, Alex here from Black Sheep IT Consulting. Welcome to another code along. And this time we are going back in history, going down the drain into email response. So that's a hot topic right now in August 22 when I record this, as fetching emails from Microsoft Online requires some authentication work. Let's cut it short. You can watch the update summaries and other videos to learn more about this. In this code along, I would like to explore a bit how email response works with attachments and get some inspiration of doing our own attachment work, so to speak. So if you look at the Siebel application here, we have a service request open. And it has one attachment, a zip file called message1. So it doesn't matter what file this is, but what matters is this service request was created automatically, not manually, through an inbound request. And the attachment was also added through the automation. So there's workflow involved, there's SOAP requests. So we will work all this out in the next few minutes. So this is what we want to achieve. We want to be able to tell Siebel, hey, there's a new email, there's a new service request, something needs your attention. Let's find an existing SR or create a new SR. And there's an attachment file or multiple files that come with the request. They have some details, and let's attach these attachments as well. But none of these steps should be manually. And it should be fully integratable through SOAP or REST. And if you think about, hey, I know something about Siebel, you can do like base64 encoding. You can create a Siebel message. And today is not the day for base64 and XML acrobatics and calling SOAP messages or using attachments with REST. So I have some code alongs for attachments with REST if you're interested. Link is in the description. But this time we want to not deal with XML and base64 and all these acrobatics and Siebel messages. We just have, well, we have a bunch of files. We have a message that comes in and we want to create an SR, and the file should be attachments. So it's that simple. So now let's go back in history to the Siebel email response module. So if you are using that, you know a lot more about it than I do. And if you've never used it, then it might be a good time to read up the email administration guide or email response guide in the Siebel bookshelf. What you find in the repository are a bunch of workflow processes starting with email response. So the main functionality here is emails are being fetched from a mail server and they are parsed and tokenized and information is gathered and contacts are looked up and service requests are created, activities are created and attachments are created and responses are being sent, maybe even automatically based on some smart answer that you find using the Siebel Smart Answer module. So this is quite a large piece of functionality of Siebel and it's used quite a lot. I have activated a few standard workflows here. So this one, the email response process service request and email response SR submit, just to give you a first glimpse into the standard functionality, which is inspirational to say the least. So let's look at the email response process service request workflow. So this runs as part of the email response overall flow. So you see a lot of business services here, extracting information, getting information, looking up information. And very often you find specialized business services like this inbound email database operations business service has a bunch of methods here. Let's open it. They are well documented in the email response guide. And as you can see, there's attached file, associate MVG records, find records, and so forth. So it's basically a helper business service that the good people who created email response back in, I don't know, maybe late 90s or early 2000s. They created this helper business service to deal with all the aspects of, well, looking up information, creating records, attaching records, working with the, well, database side of Siebel. Not really database, you never see a table or column name, it's business component stuff that you see in the input arguments. So that is an interesting business service. And that workflow literally is a dispatcher workflow. So it uses the subject keyword. So if there is a keyword like submit or query or status in the original email, then a decision is taken and, for example, takes us to the submit sub process. So there's a workflow there. So I've opened it already. And this is the workflow that creates a service request and adds an attachment and sends a email, we have received your request, and so forth. So you see here, create service request, and it's the inbound email database operations again that inserts the record here. So you might notice in these workflows that they are business object agnostic. So there's no business object context. So that's why like a Siebel operation would not work here. So the good engineers who created these workflows, they used business object agnostic techniques. So every time you call these business services, you have to specify the business object and the business component to work with, and then a bunch of fields. You basically can see how this business service works. And a reminder, if you want to use that business service, please check with your business or with Oracle, do you have a license for email response? Because this is like a email response specific business service and you need a license probably for that. Check with Oracle Sales. So then the workflow goes, is there any message file included? If yes, it's it uses attach file of the inbound email database operations, and then it has a step add attachments, not quite clear. But this uses a different business service, inbound email manager, another one of these email response business services. And this has an add attachments among other helper methods, like you see create record, get categories, get tokens. So this is more dealing with the email side of things. But it has this add attachments functionality, which takes a business object and a business component and an event fields hierarchy. So this is a child property set, and in the implementation that I created, you will see this event fields is very important. It has the file paths and the file names for the attachments. So this is all very interesting, and if you are using email response, you've probably customized these workflows heavily, and again, you know a lot more than I do. But let's go back to our initial requirement. We want to basically upsert a service request, create a service request if none is found, using maybe a service request number, and insert, create one or update one if the one is found. So upsert. And then we want to look into the details and see, okay, there are some file names. So the files have been extracted to a folder. And if there are file names, then let's create those attachments. Reading the files, creating the Siebel attachments. So I created a workflow like this. And this workflow is, I have to open it again. Yep, there you go. Okay. So this workflow uses, as you can see, a Siebel operation. So let's see what the Siebel operation does. It uses the service request business component. So there is a business object context here in the workflow. Business object is service request. So the Siebel operation uses upsert operation, and upsert takes field input arguments. And for testing prototyping purposes, I use the abstract field, and you can pass in any abstract you like from a process property SR abstract. So that will be the new value or the updated value for the abstract field. Then, of course, it needs a search spec input argument. So there's an expression here. Let's check out that expression. And that expression concatenates the search spec SR number equals to single quote. Yeah, the single quotes here, plus SR number for search. So there's an input property in that workflow that allows you to enter or provide a SR number if you have one, and it will find that SR number. It will have one record. And as you know, the Siebel operation always populates the Siebel operation object ID. So the Siebel operation object ID I'm passing on to a property SRID. So now I have the row ID of the new or updated service request. So next thing I check for is, are there any files? So let's take a look at the process properties. There is a file name list and a file path list. So the default string is just for testing. You can pass it on from the outside. So there are a comma separated list of files. So that's my own concoction, if so to speak. I like to work with strings here because maybe I want to expose this workflow as an inbound web service. And the hierarchy required for the event fields could be passed in, but you need an integration object for SOAP. And well, I don't want that. So you can pass in a comma separated list of path names where the files are stored. So imagine you have fetched the files, somehow extracted them, and they are now in a folder. Or you can, of course, have a shared folder, etc. It must be accessible from the workflow or the service owner of the Siebel server. And then there's the file names, the future attachment file names, comma separated as well, matching up with the list below. So that is what you pass in. And if you pass in any file path, that's evaluated here. So if the file path list is not null, we have files. And then we have to prepare the event fields hierarchy. So the next step is using the inbound email manager, add attachments, and that requires a child property set of type event fields. And you have to construct that. So what we have now is just comma separated strings. So what I've done is I created a custom business service. So it's a real code along where, well, there's a real code, which you will see in a moment. So let's check out that business service. And the code is coming up. So I've created a function prepare event fields. It takes the comma separate list of file names and splits it into an array. Does the same with the file path, splits it into an array, creates a temporary property set, and then it iterates the array, the file path array, and creates properties in the property set called file path 0, file path 1, and so forth, file name 0, file name 1, and so forth. So that's the requirement. That's how the business service works. So that's how it knows which files to actually add as attachments. And simply now we have the property set created properly, and we add it to the outputs, set the type to event fields, so the workflow can find it. So back to the workflow, here's the business service step. So we call that helper function, pass in the file path list, file name list, and the output argument is event fields. Now that's a process property, and that process property is hierarchy. Has to be because it's a child property set. And notice the in-out in-out property is set to none, so it's just used internally. So that way, when I create an inbound web service from that workflow, it doesn't bother me with messages, you need an integration object, blah, blah. So, because the hierarchy is just used internally. And then it's attachment time. So here we call the inbound email manager, standard functionality, add attachments. So it takes the business object first, service request, business component. So I use service request and service request attachment to establish the proper context. Then you can pass in fields. Now you would notice the field name here is activity ID, which is the real foreign key field name, even if it's service request attachment. It's basically a copy of activity attachment. But activity ID is the foreign key to the service request, to its parent. And of course, I have to pass in the row ID that we know already from the new or existing service request. That's the only field we populate in the record for the attachment. And then there's the magic event fields hierarchy that we pass in as well. And there's no output that's necessary here. So this is the simplified, oversimplified version of the requirement to take any inbound message. If there are files associated with that message and those files have been extracted somewhere, they are in a folder somewhere, take the message, look up an SR, create an SR if necessary, and attach the files. And of course, we want to see that in action, right? So what I've done here, I created a messages folder. All right, and there's a file like meme.jpg. And let's say I want to create an SR with that file attached. So let's go to the client. And let's do something different. We could run the workflow in the process business service simulator. Here I created a new snippet, a code snippet in JavaScript, which I use sometimes to test workflows. So you just have to change the process name. Here's the input argument SR number for search. So let's create a new input argument. Let me zoom in a little bit for your benefit. So let's create a new service request by specifying, well, dummy here. So there's no service request with a number dummy, so it will create a new one. The abstract I set to a timestamp, so I can see has it updated correctly. So I need 2 more properties here. And those properties are file name list and file path list. Let's copy that. And the file name list shall be, well, meme.jpg. So that's the file name. It's just one file, but you can comma separate them. And the path list, that's a share. So I created a share on these. So let's go with UNC path like you would do in real life. And the file name. Okay, so that should be it. It's all live recording here, so bear with me. And I'm logging the output property set here, so I can see what happened when I, well, let's save the snippet first and run it. Oopsie daisy, okay. Yeah, that's the backslash is killing me here. Needs double backslash. JavaScript after all. Okay. So in the console, we have the output property set. So we seems to be okay. And we have the SRID that's created. We also have the abstract that was inserted. So we should find a service request with that abstract. Let's try that. That's a summary field here. There it is. Okay, so service request has been created just now. And there's an attachment. Oh, let's open it up. Well, maybe edit it right away. There's our attachment. Hey, good to see. So, first test was done. So this was from inside Siebel, from, well, JavaScript in OpenUI, but could have been a business service simulator or any other way of running that workflow. So let's take it one step further. So what you can do with workflows, and I've done that already on that system, is let's go to workflow list and take that workflow. So in Siebel Tools, it's August 22 when I record this, and in Siebel Tools only, you can right-click, and maybe that will be added to Web Tools in the future. When you watch that video, it might well be the case. There's Deploy as Web Service, and that starts a wizard. So you specify the operation like BCRM, SR upsert or something useful. And you have to fill in the correct URL with your web server URL. You must have EAI language configured for the EAI object manager. So that's on the AI profile. And you can generate a whistle right away. So I've done that already. So I've finished this here. And what that creates is a record in the inbound web services in the same database Siebel Tools runs on. So you need to deploy that later to using the migration application. So let's check out the inbound web services here. And should be, yeah, there it is. So the name is the same as the workflow. And here's the port, the mapping to the workflow process manager, and the business service is not the business service, it's the business process, the workflow process name, and the address that I entered and the operations. I can generate my WSDL file from here, or I have it generated from Web Tools. And you might ask yourself, how sentimental is that? Why SOAP? Well, some companies are still heavily using SOAP, and they just want to use that functionality and keep using that, and it's perfectly fine. You can call workflows through REST as well. You don't need to run a wizard in Siebel Tools. You just use a copy of the Workflow Process Manager business service. And if you're on 20.3 or higher, you can run workflows directly through the REST API. But the process is very similar to SOAP. You do a post request and you pass in the input arguments, and that results in the workflow running on the Siebel server, and you get the output arguments back. So SOAP and REST for workflows is pretty much the same thing, post request, just the payload's different. And I've imported that WSDL file in, am I saying Postman? No, I'm not saying Postman, that's SOAP UI. And SOAP UI has generated a test request, and I modified that request a little bit. So I added the header, the typical SOAP header for a, well, single session, intermittent session using username and password just for testing. And here I have the body, the XML body in the SOAP body is the input arguments. So here you can see I have the file name list, file path list, same arguments here. I have the abstract. Well, let's call it SOAP 09.2.01, so I know what to look for, and it should create a new. So anything, if it doesn't find the this number, it will create a new one. So now I can, run this SOAP request. Let's see. So it comes back with a 200, and well, it should have created a service request with that abstract. So let's go back. And find that service request. And there it is, and it has the attachment, all right. So now we have a service request number. So let's try to update it through SOAP. So the search input is now a valid number, so it will find one. Let's update the abstract. Let's add another attachment out of that folder. So like, well, there's an email or a text file. Well, let's use that test1 zip file. Or let's add two attachments. Let's see what happens if we add meme JPEG one more time. And we have test1 zip, and we have the path. So now it's a real comma separated list, so you see it acting on multiple files. Okay, and well, what about exception handling? That's important too. So let's have a typo here. Now let's try to send this off. Okay, comes back with like 500, not good, but it gives us a decent, well, several decent error messages, because those inbound email manager, email response business services, they are very fault intolerant. So here it's quite clear that I couldn't find the file, right? Error occurred, opening file, system cannot find the file. So it's quite clear something wrong with the file path. So let's correct that problem and run it again. And this time comes back with 200. And well, let's see what happened to that service request. So let's just reload. Of course, we have we have the service request number. Sorry for that. There's the number. That's where I have to search for. And there you go. Well, it's acting up on me. Let's reload that. But we can see already through the mist here, there's the update happened on the abstract. It's the same SR. It has now 3 attachments. The same file has been attached a second time. That's what it does. And the zip file is attached too. So let's reload that. Not sure what happened here. So here's the plain daylight. And yes, so it's possible to not use base64, not use XML acrobatics or base64 acrobatics. Just have a folder like this one where any utility of your choice puts in the files, maybe in the file name, or it's an email with attachments that you process, and those files are extracted, and you have enough information to create or update a service request, and you can provide the attachments for the Siebel users in a workflow that is, well, starting here and maybe growing more complex over time. So there you have it, a bit of a sentimental code along with email response, and adding some soap here and cleaning the dishes, so to speak, with handling files and attachment. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time. Bye bye.